Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Patch Breakdown. My name is Pojo, and today we're going to be reviewing the 10.6 balance changes for October 6th, 2020. There's been a bunch of stuff post-Awakening release that has possibly needed to be changed, or just like some minor things that people wanted to tap on, and yeah, I think that the overall list of changes is looking very strong. There's one or two throne changes that I'm a little bit leery of, but I'm generally leery of throne in like overall at the moment, so we're gonna be trying to figure out exactly what all's good here and what's not, and what kind of stuff like needed the buffs and what kind of stuff needed the nerfs. First things first, we're going to be talking about the expedition changes. There are a bunch of changes that have been announced to improve diversity in expedition following a tournament that was very heavy with Stonescar aggro decks and Justice heavy Kira Ascending decks, basically Mono Justice and very angry Stonescar decks. We are certainly building other things along those lines, so I don't mind seeing these cards tapped, but also, like, I think these taps are probably pretty good ones. So let's talk about which ones are getting changed. First things first, we have Darkblade Cutpurse. It was a 2-1, it is now a 2-2. Or it was a 2-2, it is now a 2-1, rather. So currently, Darkblade Cutpurse has 2 health, but it will be going down 1 health and just being a 2-1 with that extremely powerful Overwhelm ability. I think this is a reasonable change. Darkblade Cutpurse's big benefit is that it is a very high reward card for a small amount of risk. And like I think that like adding some risk to the card definitely sort of fits the general aggro theme of Stonescar. Overwhelm is a powerful ability to have on a card with this high of an attack at this cheap of a cost, and Cutpurse very frequently costs very little while still giving you somewhere along the lines of a 5-2 in stats. I think a 5-1 Overwhelm is still a reasonable 2-cost card, and if you get this card up to a significantly high amount and are just attacking in with it and it's not getting responded to, it will basically end the game, and it stacks on top of a bunch of other Stonescar effects such as Argenport Instigator, Champion of Chaos, cards that already sort of do this sort of thing and provide that deck with a lot of strength. There's a reason that this card is the way it is. It technically interacts, but it basically like doesn't really care too much about what your opponent's running, and it really interacts well with stuff like Rapid Shot, other things along those lines. Midnight Hunt is the primary expedition option, of course. Anything along those lines, Darkblade Cutpurse can already get like a tremendous amount of advantage for. So putting some risk on the card so that the card is vulnerable to small damage effects like snowballs and other things like that does mean that cards like Wump and Mizo are going to be a lot more popular in the meta, but also means that like this card is not going to just run over you without you being able to find a way to interact with it or touch it in some way. And if you are running a creatures deck that doesn't have a high amount of removal, which is definitely a possibility in this format, you're still going to have a hard time with this card. It's still going to be a very powerful aggro card, and since it costs 2, I think that it's still giving you a lot of bang for your buck. I don't think this card stops the card from being played. I do think this puts the card in a more reasonable place, so all in favor of this particular change. Argenport Instigator is also getting changed. Argenport Instigator is an insanely strong shadow card and has been since set 1. It was a 3-3, it is going to be a 3-2 now, which, yeah, that's a pretty interesting change to be making. I think Argenport Instigator was always sort of defined by its non-shadowness. It was a card that isn't more balanced towards strength than health, and despite having a fairly sacrificial ability, is just really well statted and really pushed. In Throne set 1 it was pushed, and in every expedition set that it has been in, it is a really powerful card that does a lot of work for you. Now, not so much. It still gives you the ability to really synergize well with Darkblade Cutpurse and Champion of Chaos, but the card just dies to a lot more things. It doesn't trade as well. It is much more likely to get into a trade and die than it is to sort of survive any sort of like effect like Piercing Shot, Lightning Storm. Anything that deals small amounts of damage is actually going to kill this card now, and then the card does have a drawback of dealing damage to your face if it gets removed on the turn that it's played. Instigator's health was relevant to it in order to make it so that the card did not punish you for playing it, so like this does lead to some feel bad situations, but I think that overall it's a pretty strong choice to make this change, since it does give Instigator that same risk reward that we were talking about with Darkblade Cutpurse. I don't think it's a bad change by any means. Like, Instigator certainly does probably deserve this nerf, and has probably deserved this nerf for a very, very long time, but it's also a choice of what cards you want to push versus what cards you want to see very popular. This is a card that makes Stone Scar very strong, and without it, I think that there's a definite shift in what is good in Shadow. You're going to be looking at a lot more of other types of stuff along those lines, so should be good stuff. Kira Ascending, now a 2-1, was a 3-2, so that's not a particular surprise. Kira is, I wouldn't say far and away the strongest of the monocolored cards, but it's still one of the best statted ones for what it is providing. Kira basically says that anytime that you play any spell on Kira, you get to draw another card, which means that you, of course, get to play a lot of different cards on Kira to make it so that you have almost infinite card advantage in an aggro format. This is a powerful effect. We talked a little bit when this card came out about how the previous version of this effect was on a 2-2 for 3, so a 3-2 for 2 was a big step up. Like, you want this card on a 2-1, I would say at best. I'm very surprised that Kira lasted this long. Well, I'm not that surprised that Kira lasted this long because like this is just post-awakening, but I think that it's overall like a pretty interesting change up. So yeah, +2/+2 in endurance, that's totally fine. When Kira attacks, give another attacking unit her strength and health. So yeah, like all of those abilities are still relevant. The card still does most of the things you want it to do, but it's now like a 4/3 when it's attacking, and it of course does have that very high Justice Influence reward, which probably makes it worth playing. I don't think that this is going to take Kira out of the meta just because the card provides endless card advantage at a very, very small amount of value, but once again we're seeing more risk reward, and you kind of have to just do a bit more work to make her work, which I think is pretty important. And yeah, as it says in the actual like paragraph, by lowering her stats we aim to get her closer to her original intent, an early unit with tons of potential, but one that requires you to really do the work to make her exceptional. I think that's perfect as a description of what they're doing with Kira, and I think that overall that's a good change to Justice that actually allows it to be a little bit more interesting. I think that Justice frequently has an issue where its sort of balanced stat lines tend to lead to a lot of its cards being surprisingly well statted and overpowered. They generally just have a little bit more health than like black or red cards, and they generally have like a little bit more toughness than blue cards, and like all of that leads to a lot of the more creative designs just being like a little bit on the boring side, where they just don't have a lot of vulnerabilities, and you really need those vulnerabilities to like sort of make the cards work. So yeah, like I'm always interested in seeing Justice cards have more vulnerabilities. It's harder to do when you're printing cards that are like 2/2s and 3/3s and just generally have like a slightly more balanced stat line, which is part of Justice's general flavor. But yeah, like this is the type of change that we definitely want to see made. So yeah, seems very cool. And yeah, obviously Kira was bonkers, made it to semis, I believe, and got run over by a Stone Scar tech in the Last Awakening tournament, but was like just kind of a ridiculously overpowered card. Backbreaker's getting a change. They say this is an expedition change, which sure, I believe it, but I also think that this is like a pretty good change for draft. Backbreaker is now going to cost 6 instead of 5, which means that while it is still going to be a relatively well-statted weapon, it's probably going to be something along the lines of a 6/6 for 6. You're going to get like a little bit less bang for your buck. It's not like a mini sort of the Sky King anymore, where you just get a really, really nicely statted weapon that also has like the ability to become very, 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 very strong if you have a ton of Justice Influence going on. I think now you just have to work a little bit harder for it. I don't know if this takes it out of the meta. Like, it just seems like it's an insanely strong armory card in general, so not really a lot of reason not to be playing it. But yeah, as far as that goes, that seems like something that's going to be just like a little bit more in line. And this also takes it down in draft, which I think is an important change overall. Like, this card was very, very good in draft and defined a lot of draft games if you could pick up enough copies of them. Overall, I'm not really too sad or happy about that card getting nerfed. I think it does change up Armory, which if you're an Armory fan, that's definitely something that's pretty interesting. Senway Smuggler. This change is really cool. Senway Smuggler now has Decay instead of Shift 3. So previously, Senway Smuggler had Shift 3, and it was the most meaningless text that had ever been printed on a merchant. I don't know that people really used it very often. Like, you would almost never shift a Senway Smuggler, and when you did, it was not a hugely meaningful impact on your game to do so. Like, putting that much of a shift on the unit just didn't really give you anything interesting. And I think that like overall changing this up to be a decay card while making it so that Dark Frontier suddenly has decay is a very interesting look back on the history of Eternal, is nonetheless a very good change for smugglers, and like basically just gives this card a unique identity as compared to the other smugglers. I'm hugely in favor of this change. Decay is a pretty powerful effect, and I think this puts Senway Smuggler much more in line with a lot of the other smugglers. It's a cool choice. I really approve of this one, and it's practically just flavorful. Like, it doesn't really do too much to the card, but it still allows it to trade with like big units and get like some interesting like benefits out of it while, you know, just actually playing a cool smuggler. Very, very into that. Daria Warrior Poet. All right, this is the one I'm most worried about. Daria Warrior Poet is going back to a 3/4 for 4, where it was currently a 5-cost 3/5. So Daria was a 3/4 for 4 previously, and the card was nonsense. Like, it was just absolutely disgusting. At this point, there aren't quite as many like maximum power boosters. There's still like Apprentice Mage and Trailmaker, so Praxis is definitely going to be much more enabled by this. I think this is like a clear signal to build Praxis decks, use Angelica, use cards that like basically like really push that sort of Praxis theme, because this is a very pushed legendary that actually allows you to build into these colors and make something interesting happen with them. Berserk and Deadly together make for a lot of hot nonsense. If you're combining this with All Heads Decay ability, you get into some pretty wild territory already, but the card just comes with a lot of value on top of the ability to have Pledge, which is just a generally useful thing to have in any sort of like expedition type setup. Notably, this card is not an expedition at the moment, so this says it's an expedition change. It's currently found in Defiance, though, so I'm not sure if this is actually listed as an expedition change or if it's a throne change. Yeah, okay, well, if it is an expedition change, this card is coming into expedition, then like that's something to keep an eye out for. But like, yeah, this is nonetheless like a pretty powerful change up for throne decks as far as things go. Yeah, interesting that it's in the expedition thing, since we are now going to go into a bunch of buffs that are specifically aimed at throne, and for some reason Daria Warrior Poet isn't in that list. Alright, so in Throne we're seeing some cards come back to their former glory. We're also seeing some changes to cards to try to give a couple of new ones their day in the sun, is the general tagline. The first is Copper Conduit, going to a 1-drop. This is a bonkers card. I think this is a pretty wild change. Copper Conduit is not a good card at 2. It is an insane card at 1. This card is really, really strong with all sorts of like general buff effects that basically just sink a small amount of power. Cards that resurrect, such as Dark Return, Immortalize, Predator's Instinct, anything with Killer, Xenon Initiation, anything where you're just spending a small amount to make this card like a little bit more modal, gives you a very, very large Overwhelm unit that you can recur over and over and over again to just murderize everything. This is actually a really strong expedition change that should make Copper Conduit very viable in Xenon decks, and I think it will be a pretty dominant card in both Xenon and Praxis for the foreseeable future. Like, this is just an insanely strong card. Play it. It's very, very good. The nerf from 1 to 2 was extremely strong for Copper Conduit. Like, it was something that actually took it completely out of the meta. The nerf from 2 to 1 puts it entirely back in and puts it at the top of cards that you want to play. This is a really flexible, really easy to use, extremely strong card that synergizes very well with the many killer effects and the many recursion effects that are in Xenon right now in Expedition. So this is a bonkers card that you should be keeping an eye out for, because it's going to make some waves. Woda, Gyarados listener, going to a 3/4. Oh wait, no, a 2/4, and pay 6 to give +3/+3 this turn instead of pay 8. Yeah, pay 8 was always a weird cost for Woda's ability. I don't know why that costs so much, but yeah, now this card can activate on 6 and play its mastery to get more invokes. That's a nice little benefit. In Throne, this should make the card a little bit more playable. It's also a little more durable, which is really, really relevant for Throne, because Throne just laughs at anything that dies to Torch and dies to 3 stuff in it in general. Like, yeah, this is an important change overall for the card, and I think it makes it much more viable in Throne. Whether or not that makes it playable in Throne is an interesting question, because Throne just has so many bombs to choose from, but it's certainly an interesting change-up. Moonstone Vanguard is going back up to a 5-cost 5/5 from a 5-cost 4/4. Also gains you 5 health because it has always gained health equal to its own health. This is a fine change if you're playing for Throne. Like, just makes the card more powerful, makes Sentinels more powerful, makes Sentinels more viable because the card is just really, really good. We've seen this card before at 5, and it was very, very nasty. It was too good for Expedition, but it's not too good for Throne. This is now much more like ahead of the pack, but still somewhat average card overall at 5. And it has Pledge, which is really, really useful in Throne, even, while Plunder is stealing the show. Snowcrest Yeti, going back to a 2/1. This card is unplayable as a 1/1, so I guess I'm in favor of this change. It's also the host to, like, the most aggressive and scary Skycrag deck, which we saw for, like, straight years on end, so I'm not as in favor of seeing this card come back, but hey, there it is. It's a 2/1 now. That does make it a powerful aggro card, and it makes it a powerful option. Vanquish. Vanquish is now 2 again. Yeah, this card's always been good at 2. It's a great balancer that tends to really solve for a lot of the scary problems. This now kills Moonstone Vanguard, which is exciting. Well, I mean, it kills Moonstone Vanguard at 2. It already killed Moonstone Vanguard. But yeah, this makes it a much more viable choice as far as like hard removal goes for Justice. And Justice is probably going to be happy to have it because there is a lot of big stuff that you really want to kill in green. I think this definitely enables like old Ikaria decks to come back, a lot of the standard Justice control stuff to come back. Overall, I'm not like hugely in favor of this change just because like Vanquish has seen its day in the sun and was very, very good in that particular respect. It would be nice to see some other green removal spell be like the preeminent removal spell in green in Throne. But, like, yeah, this is fine. It's not a big change either way. Well, it is a big change either way. It definitely, like, puts this card to viable in Throne, which is the only place where it's currently playable. So I guess that's a big bonus and a big feather in its cap. Crown of Authority. Probably one of the worst legendaries in the game. Now getting a pretty significant buff. So units you draw used to get +2/+2 off this. Now they get +4/+4. I don't know that this changes anything about Crown of Authority. It's still kind of a boring card that doesn't really do a lot of things. It gives you a tutor for 14, and it now gives you the ability to get really, really, really big units, which I've talked before about how green has this problem with like just playing stats. Like they play really balanced units, and then they have a lot of like big relics that are just like, all of our stuff doubles, or we play spells and then we get more boring units that have like just a raw amount of stats. Crown of Authority is a little more interesting than those cards, but it's not better than those cards. Like, so I'm not sure what the general appeal is here. Now that you can pick out like an Eileen and make the Eileen into like a monster 11/11, this is definitely much more of a Timmy card. I think the reward for this is much better, and as a result the card is just like better designed as a result of having this. I also don't think this card gets played in Throne, even if you have it at 7. If you can find a way to make it cheap with like a Shardbinder type effect, there is a card that actually reduces the cost of it. It's like a 4/2 in time. So if you can play this card for fairly cheap, you're getting some good like Svetja style effects, but this is still an effect that's better on units like Navani and Svetja, and even on like Navani it wasn't great. So yeah, I'm skeptical of this one. +4/+4 is a huge upgrade, to be sure, and the ultimate ability is still like at least relevant for giving you your card back. Of course, if you just had a unit with cost 7 or more that you wanted, you would be playing that instead. So, like this was not a good card before. It's nice to see it pushed a little bit more into relevance. I still think it's kind of one of the worst cards in Eternal. But yeah, I mean, now people will play it, and it will probably be pretty boring. We'll see. Innate Conviction. Okay, Warp, deal 3 damage, Onslaught, create and draw a 3/4 dragon. Now creates and draws a 3/5 dragon. With your spells, deal +2 damage. I'm a big fan of this change. Innate Conviction's primary difficulties were that it was a Warp Onslaught card, so it's pretty hard to actually activate for its card advantage. And then the Onslaught ability is the thing that you most want out of it, which is the ability to create a card that gives you spell damage, but there are several problems with it. One, you have to play the Archdragon, which is difficult because the Archdragon costs 4 as well, so you're fairly behind on tempo by the time you put it down. It also has Flying, Berserk, and Overwhelm, but those stats tend not to matter because the Archdragon also dies. I think that giving the Archdragon more stats is definitely a great way to make the Archdragon matter, and giving the Archdragon more spell damage is a great way to make the Archdragon actually do things. Extra spell damage is really, really cool. There aren't a lot of cards that give +2 spell damage, and most of them are very, very safe. But if you have +2 spell damage, then you can do some pretty wild stuff. For example, like Wumpen Mizo now has like 3 damage torching snowballs. Oh boy, that's fun and exciting. I think there's a lot of cool things that you can do with spell damage. Primal has just not had a good spell damage identity ever, and even in the set where spell damage was supposed to matter, it was not used very much. So I think this is a really solid change, and I think that Archdragons having more health is a very good change, since it means that the Archdragons are actually more likely to live, and thus give you some sort of cool benefit for triggering your onslaught and then spending an entire other turn playing this dragon. Yeah, it's cool stuff. I don't think these come off random dragons, so it would be cool to see Archdragon come out, say, in the next set as a unit that you could actually play, but then it would be a 4-cost 3/5 Flying, Berserk, Overwhelm, so probably not gonna happen. Nonetheless, like, Innate Conviction is an interesting card. I've always liked the sort of like very wonkiness of it, and I think that like cleaning up that wonkiness a little bit more, continuing to force you into like a weird play pattern to get your spell damage, but like just making it so it's much more likely that that unit sticks, is a very good change. Livia Hexweaver. Livia Hexweaver. Lifesteal, units with endurance can't block. Now enemies with endurance can't block. I don't know why Livia didn't say this before. I mean, it's just like straight up a good idea to have that text on it. This makes Livia better, obviously, because now you can play it with like your own Sandstorm Titans. But like, yeah, I mean, this is just text that should have been on the card in the first place. So yeah, it's a big change. It's a good change to Livia. I think that like overall there wasn't a lot of reason to have Livia like punish your own units with endurance. It's not like Ankle Cutter where you're clearly committed to like a super aggro strat, and so like if you're playing a big unit with endurance, you're kind of like defying the spirit of it. I mean, even on Ankle Cutter, I'd actually be okay with that card saying enemy units with endurance can do that. So yeah, you know, like the way that this like sort of has a global effect is unusual. Maybe they could go after Ankle Cutter next. But this is a nice little change to make elves more aggressive and allow you to play Sandstorm Titans along with your elves, which is going to open up a couple of possibilities in those decks. Relentless Gorehorn. Revenge, summon your other Minotaurs, get +2. Now Revenge, summon your other your Minotaurs, get +2. So it's just a 5/3 for 4 now. That doesn't make it that much better. It's still a Revenge Minotaur card and means you have to play a lot of Minotaurs with it, but it makes the idea of including Gorehorn in, say, a Tavrod deck a lot happier. Like, you're pretty happy to see, like, interesting Minotaurs have a result of this. Maybe now, like, the very first Revenge Minotaur ever could actually see some play. There's like a 2-cost 1/1 that like attacks and gets a bonus, and I don't believe it's ever seen play in anything, so it would be kind of cool to see it like in a Revenge Minotaur deck where you just did a lot of like hot nonsense. Yeah, this is a big buff to this card, and again, like, it's thrown, so like a lot of these changes won't matter too much because people are just going to be playing like the biggest possible bombs as opposed to like the interesting synergies. But if you want to do something fun in Throne, if you want to play Jank in Throne, I think these are all cards that have been upgraded from like unplayable to will actually win you games sometimes. So these are all like D cards coming up to C. That's true of Innate Conviction, Livia, Gorehorn, Crown of Authority, and it's not true of the rest of them because the rest of them are pretty wild. Now, it's true of Woda. So like those are all cards that are coming into a little bit more of a playable sphere where you can actually play interesting jank and have a little bit of fun. I think that it's a good way to add some fun to Throne. I'm always in favor of these weird little goobers getting buffed. And like, yeah, there's also just a ton of stuff that's coming back that's from like the original decks, and those are going to stomp all over those decks. So yeah, you know, the B stuff getting, or the C stuff getting upgraded back to A is probably going to slightly overshadow it. Still, this is a good list of changes. There isn't really a change here that I disagree with, apart from maybe Dario Warrior Poet, because Dario Warrior Poet was Ooh, wildly bonkers. Some of the crushbacks on like Snowcrest Yeti and Vanquish could lead to very familiar metas resurging, but overall this is a solid list of changes that should make Throne a little bit more interesting and should definitely make Expedition a lot more interesting and even have like some small effects in draft. So yeah, look to those cards. I'm certainly excited for Copper Conduit to be back in the meta. That's just like one of my favorite like bonkers weird cards. It's just fun to play around with. This card's really strong. There's a lot of cool things you can do with it. But yeah, beyond that, like it seems like just a very solid list of changes all around. So that's our whole setup there. That is the patch breakdown for 10.6. So that should be coming out the day that this video posts. So feel free to log in, try out the new changes, and give those killer conduits a little hello. Thanks everyone so much for watching. I am on YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and Patreon. You can check us out Monday, Tuesday, Friday right now, as well as some Saturdays and Sundays for lots more additional Eternal content, brews, shenanigans, as well as a lot of Among Us at the moment with a bunch of MTG pros. We have been really enjoying that particular aspect of the stream as well. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all next time, and have a lovely day wherever you are. Cheers.